Okay, got it.
Welcome, everybody, to the 37th meeting of Soteria, where we are continuing with our reading of Smith and the Pharaohs by Sir Rider Haggard.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's see. Can everyone see? Oh, yeah. Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Oh, no,
Well, I can.
Last time it was a little bit larger print. I don't know if
Okay, that's not a problem. It should be possible to
hit the plus thing at the top. Yeah.
yeah. No, where is it? Let's have a look.
where it
Is
says
it-
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you see it differently, Stead. It's
Yeah,
next to the
Yeah,
100.
I can't see anything at all.
Oh, that's interesting. I think we can all see 100%, and then there's a plus and minus
Okay.
right in the middle.
I mean, I can see it to read it, but I'm just saying that it's a little bit easier to follow if it's a little bit larger.
Yeah. Yes. There is no. Hang on. I think I can sort that out.
You want always show toolbar in full
Yeah,
screen
hang
or
on.
something like that. Yeah. Something like that. You've got your toolbar
Oh, yeah.
removed or something.
Yeah. Let's see. Zoom in. No, that's
125%.
That's
That's
better.
huge. Yeah.
That's
It just
good.
has the disadvantage. Stead has to move it more, of course.
No. It's fine. Right. Let's maybe. Oh, right. No, is that too big?
It's two chapters, and we just finished the first chapter. Yeah.
Maybe.
Perfect.
Yeah. This is the end of it. Yeah. Nothing more inside the tomb. Not even a scab or mummy bead. Smith spent the remainder of his night in photographing the pictures and copying the inscriptions, which for various reasons proved to be of extraordinary interest. Then, having reverently buried the charred bones of the Queen in a secret place of the sepulchre, he handed it over to the local guardian of antiquities, paid off Mohammed and the Fellaheen, and departed for Cairo. With him went the wonderful jewels of which he had breathed no word, and another relic to him yet more precious, the hand of Her Majesty Marmi, palm branch of love. And now follows the strange sequel of the story of Smith and the Queen Marmi. Michael, perhaps you'd like to start. Michael in France.
Okay. Smith was seated in the sanctum of the Distinguished Director General of Antiquities at the New Cairo Museum. It was a very interesting room. Books piled upon the floor, objects from tombs awaiting examination lying here and there. A hoard of Ptolemaic silver coins just dug up at Alexandria, standing on a table in the pot that had hidden them for 2,000 years. In the corner, the mummy of a royal child, aged 6 or 7, not long ago discovered, with some inscription scrawled upon the wrappings, brought here to be deciphered by the master, and the withered lotus bloom, love's last offering, thrust beneath one of the pink retaining bands. A touching object, thought Smith to himself. Really, they might have left the dear little girl in peace. Smith had a tender heart, but even as he reflected, he became aware that some of the jewelry hidden in an inner pocket of his waistcoat, designed for banknotes, was fretting his skin. He had a tender conscience also. Just then, the director, a French savant, bustled in, alert, vigorous, full of interest. "Ah, my dear Mr. Smith," he said in his excellent English, "I am indeed glad to see you back again, especially as I understand you are come rejoicing in bringing your sheaves with you. They tell me you have been extraordinarily successful. What do you say is the name of this queen whose tomb you have found?" "Mame? A very unusual name. How do you get the extra vowel? Is it for euphony? Hey? Did I not know how good a scholar you are, I should be tempted to believe that you had misread it. Mime, mimi, mommy. That would be pretty in French, would it not? Mommy, my darling. Well, I dare say. She was somebody's me in her time. But tell me the story.
Oh, okay.
Smith told him shortly and clearly. Also, he produced his photographs and copies of inscription. This is interesting truly, said the director, when he had glanced through them. You must leave them to me to study. Also, you will publish them, is it not so? Perhaps one of the societies would help you with the cost, for it should be done in facsimile. Look at this vignette, most unusual. Oh, what a pity that scoundrelly priest got off with the jewelry and burnt Her Majesty's body. He didn't get off with all of it. What, Mr. Smith? Our inspector reported to me that you found nothing. I dare say, sir, but your inspector did not know where I found. Ah, you are a discreet man. Well, let us see. Smith slowly unbuttoned his waistcoat. From its inner pocket and elsewhere about his person, he extracted the jewels wrapped in mummy cloth as he had found them. First, he produced the scepter head of gold in the shape of a pomegranate fruit and engraved with the throne name and titles of Ma May. What a beautiful object, said the director. Look, the handle is of ivory, and that sacre thief of a priest smashed it out of socket. It was fresh ivory then. The robbery must have taken place not long after the burial. See, this magnifying glass shows it. Is that all? Smith handed him the surviving half of the marvelous necklace that had been torn in two. I have rethreaded it, he muttered, but every bead is in its place. Oh, heavens, how lovely! Note the cutting of those cornelian heads of Hathor, and the gold lotus blooms between. Yes, and the enameled flies beneath. We have nothing like it in the. So it went on. Is that all? Gasped the director at last, when every object from the basket glittered before them on the table. Yes, said Smith. That is, no. I found a broken statuette hidden in the sand outside the tomb. It is of the queen, but I thought perhaps you would allow me to keep it. But certainly, Mr. Smith, it is yours indeed. We are not niggards here, if I might say. From yet another pocket, Smith produced the head. The director gazed at it, and he spoke with feeling. I said just now that you were discreet, Mr. Smith, and I've been reflecting that you are honest. And now I must add that you are very clever. If you had not made me promise that this bronze should be yours before you showed it to me, well, it would never have gone into that pocket again. And in the public interest, won't you release me from the promise? No, said Smith. You are perhaps not aware, went on the director with a groan, that this is a portrait of Harriet's unknown queen, whom we are thus able to identify. It seems a pity the two should be separated, a replica that you have. I am quite aware, said Smith, and I will be sure to send you a replica of the photographs. Also, I promise to leave the original to some museum. I will. The director clasped the image tenderly and, holding it to the light, read the broken cartouche beneath the dress. Ma May, great royal lady, beloved of whom? Well, of Smith, for one. Take it, monsieur, and hide it away at once, lest soon there should be another mummy in this collection, a modern mummy called Smith. And in the name of justice, let the museum which inherits it not be the British, but that of Cairo. This queen belongs to Egypt. By the way, I have been told that you are delicate in the lungs. How is your health now? Our cold winds are very trying. Quite good? Oh, that is excellent. I suppose that you have no more articles that you can show me? Nothing more except a mummied hand, which I found in the basket with the jewels. The two rings off it lie there. Doubtless it was removed to get at that bracelet. I suppose you will not mind my keeping the hand. Of the beloved of Smith, interrupted the director drolly. No, I suppose not, though for my part, I should prefer one that was not quite so old. Still, perhaps you will not mind my seeing it. That pocket of yours still looks a little bulky. I thought it contained books. Smith produced a cigar box. In it was a hand, wrapped in cotton wool. Ah, said the director, a pretty well-bred hand. No doubt this Ma May was the real heiress to the throne, as she describes herself. The Pharaoh was somebody of inferior birth, half-brother. She is called royal sister, you remember. Son of one of the Pharaoh's slave women, perhaps. Odd that she never mentioned him in the tomb. It looks as though they didn't get on in life, and that she was determined to have done with him in death. Those were the rings upon that hand, were they not? He replaced them on the fingers, then took off one, a signet in a cartouche, and read the inscription on the other. Bess Ankh Bess, Bess the living Bess. Your mom May had some human vanity about her, he added. Bess, among other things, as you know, was the god of beauty and the adornments of women. She wore that ring that she might remain beautiful, and that her dresses might always fit, and her roof never came when she was dancing before the gods. Also, it fixes her pretty closely, but then so do other things. It seems a pity to rob May of her pet ring, does it not? The royal signet will be enough for us. With a little bow, he gave the hand back to Smith, leaving the best ring on the finger that had worn it for more than 3,000 years. At least Smith was so sure it was the best ring that at the time he did not look at it again. Then they parted, Smith promising to return upon the morrow, which, owing to events to be described, he did not do. Ah, said the master to himself as the door closed behind the visitor. He's in a hurry to be gone. He has fear lest I should change my mind about that ring. Also, there is the bride. Monsieur Smith was bruised there. It is worth £1,000, that bronze. Yet I do not believe he was thinking of the money. I believe he is in love with that Monet and wants to keep her picture. Mon Dieu, a well-established affection, at least he is what the English call an odd fish, one who never makes and of whom no one seems to know anything. Still honest, I am sure, quite honest. Why he might have kept every one of those jewels and no one have been the wiser. And what things, what a find, ciel, what a find. There has been nothing like it for years. Benediction on the head of odd fish. Then he collected the precious objects, thrust them into an inner compartment of the safe, which he locked and double locked. As it was nearly 5 o'clock, he departed from the museum to his private residence in the grounds, there to study Smith's copied the photographs and to tell some friends of the great things that had happened. When Smith found himself outside the sacred door and had presented its venerable guardian with a black bakshish of 5 piastres, he walked a few paces to the right and paused a while to watch some native laborers who were dragging a huge sarcophagus upon an improvised tramway. As they dragged, they sang an echoing rhythmic song, whereof each line ended with an invocation to Allah. Just so, reflected Smith. Father saw them millenniums ago. They dragged that very sarcophagus from the quarries to the Nile, from the Nile to the tomb, whence it reappeared today, or when they slid the casing blocks of the pyramids up the great causeway and smooth slope of sand, and laid them in their dizzy resting place. Only then, each line of the immemorial chant of toil ended with an invocation to Amen, now transformed to Allah. The East may change its gods, but its customs never change. And if today Allah wore the feathers of Amen, one wonders whether the worshippers would find the difference so very great. Thought Smith from the sarcophagus, and those blue-robed, dark-skinned fellaheen down the long gallery filled with 1,000 sculptures. For a moment he paused before the wonderful white statue of Queen Amenartas. Then, remembering that his time was short, hastened to a certain room, one of those which opened out of the gallery.
Shall we?
Yeah, I'm just going to say yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Maybe Janine, you'd like to
Sure.
take up the story.
In a corner of this room, upon the wall, amongst many other beautiful objects, stood that head which Marriott had found, whereof in past years the cast had fascinated him in London. Now he knew whose head it was. To him it had been given to find the tomb of her who had sat for that statue. Her very hand was in his pocket. Yes, the hand that had touched yonder marble, pointing out its defects to the sculptor, or perhaps swearing that he flattered her. Smith wondered who that sculptor was. Surely he must have been a happy man. Also, he wondered whether the statuette was also his master's work. He thought so, but he wished to make sure. Near the end of the room, he stopped and looked about him like a thief. He was alone in the place. Not a single student or tourist could be seen, and its guardian was somewhere else. He drew out the box that contained the hand. From the hand, he slipped the ring, which the Director General had left there as a gift to himself. How much he would much have preferred the other with the signet, but how could he say so, especially after the episode of the statuette? Replacing the hand in his pocket without looking at the ring, for his eyes were watching to see whether he was observed, he set it upon his little finger, which it exactly fitted. Mamie had worn both of them, on the third finger of her left hand, the best ring as a guard to the signet. He had the fancy to approach the effigy of Mamie, wearing a ring which she had worn and that came straight from her finger to his own. Smith found the head in its accustomed place. Weeks had gone by since he looked upon it, and now to his eyes it had grown more beautiful than ever, and its smile was more mystical and living. He drew out the statuette and began to compare them point by point. Oh, no doubt was possible. Both were likenesses of the same woman, though the statuette might have been executed 2 or 3 years later than the statue. To him, the face of it looked a little older and more spiritual. Perhaps illness or some premonition of her end had then thrown its shadow on the queen. He compared and compared. He made some rough measurements and sketches in his pocketbook and set himself to work out a canon of proportions. So hard and earnestly did he work, so lost was his mind that he never heard the accustomed warning sound which announces that the museum is about to close. Hidden behind an altar as he was, in his distant shadowed corner, the guardian of the room never saw him as he cast a last perfunctory glance about the place before departing till the Saturday morning. For the morrow was Friday, the Mohammedan Sabbath, on which the museum remained shut, and he would not be called upon to attend. So he went. Everybody went. The great doors clanged, were locked and bolted, and, save for a watchman outside, no one was left in all that vast place except Smith in his corner, engaged in sketching and in measurements. The difficulty of seeing, owing to the increase of shadow, first called his attention to the fact that time was slipping away. He glanced at his watch and saw it was 10 minutes to the hour. Soon be time to go, he thought to himself, and resumed his work. How strangely silent this place seemed, not a footstep to be heard or a sound of a human voice. He looked at his watch again and saw that it was 6 o'clock, not 5, or so the thing said. But that was impossible, for the museum shut at 5. Evidently, the desert sand had got into the works. The room in which he stood was known as Room 1, and he had noticed that its Arab custodian often frequented Room K, or the gallery outside. He would find him and ask what was the real time. Passing around the effigy of the wonderful Hathor cow, perhaps the finest example of an ancient sculpture of a beast in the whole world, Smith came to the doorway and looked up and down the gallery. Not a soul to be seen. He ran to Room K, to Room H, and others. Still not a soul to be seen. Then he made his way as fast as he could go to the great entrance. The doors were locked and bolted. Watch must be right after all. I'm shut in, he said to himself. However, there's sure to be someone about somewhere. Probably in the Salle des Ventes. Can't read that. Is still open. Shops don't shut till they are obliged. Thither he went to find its doors firmly closed as the door can be. He knocked on it, but a sepulchral echo was the only answer. I know, he reflected, the director must still be in his room. It will take him a long while to examine all that jewelry and put it away. So for the room he headed, and after losing his path twice, found it by help of the sarcophagus that the Arabs had been dragging, which now stood as deserted as it had, in the tomb, a lonesome and impressive object in the gathering shadows. The director's door was shut, and again his knockings produced nothing but an echo. He started on the tour round the museum, and having searched the ground floors, ascended to the upper galleries by the great stairway. Presently he found himself in that devoted to the royal mummies, and being tired, rested there a while. Opposite to him, in a glass case in the middle of the gallery, reposed Ramses II. Near to, on shelves in a side case, were Ramses' sons, Meneptah, and above his son, Seti II, while in other cases were the mortal remains of many more of the royalties of Egypt. He looked at the proud face of Ramses and at the little fringe of white locks turned yellow by the embalmer's spices, also at the raised left arm. He remembered how the director had told him that when they were enrolling this mighty monarch, they went away to lunch, and that presently the man who had been left in charge of the body rushed into the room with his hair on end and said that the dead king had lifted his arm and pointed at him. Back they went, and there, true enough, was the arm lifted, nor were they ever able to get it quite into its place again. The explanation given was that the warmth of the sun had contracted the withered muscles in a very natural and correct explanation. Still, Smith wished that he had not recollected the story at this moment, especially as the arm seemed to move while he contemplated it. A very little, but still a move. He turned round and gazed at Meneptah, whose hollow eyes stared at him from between the wrappings carelessly thrown across the parchment-like and ashen face. There probably lay the countenance that had frowned on Moses. There was the heart which God had hardened. Well, it was hard enough now, for the doctor said he died of ossification of the arteries, and that the vessels of the heart were full of lime. Smith stood upon a chair and peeped at Seti II above. His weaker countenance was very peaceful, but it seemed to wear an air of reproach. In getting down, Smith managed to upset the heavy chair. The noise it made was terrific. He would not have thought it possible that a fall of such an article could produce so much sound. Satisfied with his inspection of these particular kings, who somehow looked quite different now that they had ever done before, more real and imminent, so to speak, he renewed his search for a living man. On he went, mummies to his right, mummies to his left, and at every style and period, till he began to feel as though he never wished to see another dried mummy, remnant of mortality. He peeped into the room where lay the relics of Aroya and Toyu, the father and mother of the great Queen Taya. Cloths had been drawn over these, and really they looked worse and more suggestive, thus draped, than in their frigid and unadorned blackness. He came to the coffins of the priest kings of the 20th dynasty, formidable printed coffins with human faces. There seemed to be a vast number of these priest kings, but perhaps they were better than the gold masks of the great Ptolemaic ladies which glinted at him through the gathering gloom. A frog in my throat. Really, he had seen enough of the upper force. The statues downstairs were better than all these dead, although it was true that according to the Egyptian faith, every one of those statues was haunted eternally by the Ka, or double, of the person whom it represented. He descended the great stairway. Was it fancy, or did something run across the bottom step in front of him? An animal of some kind, followed by a swift moving and indefinite shadow? If so, it must have been a museum cat hunting a museum mouse. Only then what on earth was that very peculiar and unpleasant shadow? He called, "Puss, puss, puss," for he would have been quite glad of its company. But there came no friendly meow in response. Perhaps it was only the caw of the cat, and the shadow was, oh, never mind that. The Egyptians worshiped cats, and there were plenty of mummies about on the shelves, of their mummies on the shelves. But the shadow, once he shouted in the hope of attracting attention, for there were no windows to which he could climb. He did not repeat the experiment, for it seemed as though 1,000 voices were answering him from every corner of the roof of the gigantic edifice. Well, he must face the thing out. He was shut in a museum, and the question was, in what part of it should he camp for the night? Moreover, as it was growing rapidly dark, the problem must be solved at once. He thought with affection of the lavatory, where before going to see the director only that afternoon, he had washed his hands with the assistance of a kindly Arab who watched the door and gracefully accepted a piastra. But there was no Arab there now, and the door, like every other in this confounded place, was locked. He marched on to the entrance. Here, opposite to each other, stood the red sarcophagi of the great Queen Hatshepsut and her brother and husband, Tomtes III. He looked at them. Why should not one of these afford him a night's lodging? They were deep in quiet and would fit the human frame very nicely. For a while, Smith wondered which of these monarchs would be the more likely to take offense at such a use of a private sarcophagus, and, acting on general principles, concluded that he would rather throw himself on the mercy of the lady. Already one of his legs was over the edge of that solemn coffer, and he was squeezing his body beneath the massive lid that was propped above it on blocks of wood. When he remembered a little, naked, withered thing with long hair that he had seen in a side chamber of the tomb of Amenhotep II in the Valley of the Kings at Thebes, this caricature of humanity, many thought, and he agreed with them, to be the actual body of the mighty Hatshepsut as it appeared after the robbers had done with it. Supposing now, when he was lying at the bottom of that sarcophagus, sleeping the sleep of the just, this little personage should peep over its edge and ask him what he was doing there. Of course, the idea was absurd. He was tired and his nerves were a little shaken. Still, the fact remained that for centuries, the hallowed dust of Queen Hatshepsut had slept where he, a modern man, was proposing to sleep. Scrambled down from the sarcophagus and looked round him in despair. Opposite to the main entrance was a huge central hall of the museum. Now the cement roof of this hall had, he knew, gone wrong, with the result that very extensive repairs had become necessary. So extensive were they, indeed, that the Director General had informed him that they would take several years to complete. Therefore, this hall was boarded up, only a little doorway being left by which the workmen could enter. Certain statues of Seti II and others too large to be moved were also roughly boarded over, as were some great funeral boats on either side of the entrance. The rest of the place, which might be 200 feet long with a proportionate breadth, was empty, save the Colossus of Amenhotep II and his queen, Tiara, that stood beneath the gallery at its further end.
Thanks, Janine. AJ, do you feel up to reading this week?
Yeah, I'm fine. I was last time, but I'm good now.
Great.
Okay, it was an appalling place in which to sleep, but better reflected Smith than a sarcophagus or those mummy chambers. If, for instance, he could creep behind the deal boards that enclosed one of the funeral boats, he would be quite comfortable there. Lifting the curtain, he slipped into the hall, where the gloom of the evening had already settled. Only the skylights and the outline of the towering colossi at the far end remained visible. Close to him were the two funeral boats which he had noticed when he looked into the hall earlier that day, standing at the head of a flight of steps which led to the sunk floor of the center. He groped his way to that on the right. As he expected, the projecting planks were not quite joined at the bow. He crept in between them and the boat and laid himself down. Presumably, being altogether tired out, Smith did ultimately fall asleep. For how long, he never knew. At any rate, it is certain that if so, he woke up again. He could not tell the time because his watch was not a repeater, and the place was as black as the pit. He had some matches in his pocket, and he might have struck one and even lit his pipe. To his credit be it said, however, he remembered that he was the sole tenant of one of the most valuable museums in the world, and his responsibilities with reference to fire. So he refrained from striking that match under the keel of the boat, which had become very dry in the course of 5,000 years. Smith found himself very wide awake indeed. Never in all his life did he remember being more so, not even in the hour of its great catastrophe, or when his godfather Ebenezer, after much hesitation, had promised him a clerkship in the bank of which he was director. His nerves seemed strung tight as harpstrings, and his every sense was painfully acute. Thus he could even smell the odor of mummies that floated down into the upper gallery, and the earthy scent of the boat which had been buried for thousands of years in sand at the foot of the pyramid of one of the Fifth Dynasty kings. Moreover, he could hear all sorts of strange sounds, faint, faraway sounds, which at first he thought must emanate from Cairo without. Soon, however, he grew sure that their origin was more local. Doubtless the cement work and the cases in the galleries were cracking audibly, as is the unpleasant habit of such things at night. Yet why should these common manifestations be so universal and affect him so strangely? Really, it seemed as though people were all about him. More, he could have sworn that the great funeral boat beneath which he lay had become repeopled with the crew that once it bore. He heard them at their business above him. There were trampings and the sound as though something heavy were being laid on the deck. Such, for instance, as much had been made when the mummy of Pharaoh was set on its last journey to the western bank of the Nile. Yes, and now he could have sworn again that the priestly crew were getting out the oars. Smith began to meditate flight from the neighborhood of that place when something occurred which determined him to stop where he was. The huge hall was growing light, but not, as he had first hoped, with the rays of dawn. This light was pale and ghostly, though very penetrating. Also, it had a blue tinge, unlike any other he had ever seen. At first it arose as a kind of fan or fountain at the far end of the hall, illumining the steps there and the whole two noble colossi which sat above. But what was this that stood at the head of the steps, radiating glory? By heavens, it was Osiris himself, or the image of Osiris, god of the dead, the Egyptian savior of the world. Take a sip of coffee then. There he stood in his mummy cloths, wearing the feathered crown and holding in his hands, which projected from an opening in the wrappings, the crook and the scourge of power. Was he alive or was he dead? Smith could not tell, since he never moved, only stood there, splendid and fearful, his calm, benignant face staring into nothingness. Smith became aware that the darkness between him and the vision of this god was peopled, that a great congregation was gathering or had gathered there. The blue light began to grow, long tongues of it shot forward, which joined themselves together, illumining all that huge hall. Now, too, he saw the congregation. Before him, rank upon rank of them, stood the kings and queens of Egypt. As though at a given signal, they bowed themselves to Osiris, and ere the tinkling of their ornaments had died away, lo, Osiris was gone. But in his place stood another, Isis, the mother of mystery, her deep eyes looking forth from beneath the jeweled vulture cap. Again the congregation bowed, and lo, she was gone. But in her place stood yet another, a radiant, lovely being who held in her hand the sign of life and wore upon her head the symbol of the shining disk, Hathor, goddess of love. A third time the congregation bowed, and she too was gone, nor did any other appear in her place. The pharaohs and their queens began to move about and speak to each other. Their voices came to his ears in one low, sweet murmur. In his amaze, Smith had forgotten fear. From his hiding place, he watched them intently. Some of them he knew by their faces. There, for instance, was the long-necked Kuanatan, now talking somewhat angrily to the imperial Ramses II. Smith could understand what he said, for this power seemed to have been given to him. He was complaining in a high, weak voice that on this, the one night of the year when they might meet, the gods or the magic images of the gods who were put up for them to worship should not include his god, symbolized by the Aten, or the sun's disk. I have heard of your majesty's God, replied Ramses. The priest used to tell me of him, and that he did not last long after your majesty flew to heaven. The fathers of Ammon gave you a bad name. They called you the heretic and hammered out your cartouches. They were quite rare in my time. Oh, do not let your majesty be angry. Many of us have been heretics. My grandson, Seti there, he pointed to a mild, thoughtful-faced man. For example, I am told that he really worshipped the god of those Hebrew slaves, whom I used to press to build my cities. Look at that lady with him, beautiful, isn't she? Observe her large violet eyes. Well, she was the one who did the mischief, a Hebrew herself. At least they tell me so. I will talk with him, answered Kuanatan. It is more than possible that we may agree on certain points. Meanwhile, let me explain to your majesty. Oh, I pray you, not now. There is my wife. Your wife, said Kuanatan, drawing himself up. Which wife? I am told that your majesty had many and left a large family. Indeed, I see some hundreds of them here tonight. Now but let me introduce Nefertiti to your majesty, and I may explain that she was my only wife. So I have understood. Your majesty was rather an invalid, were you not? Of course, in those circumstances, one prefers the nurse whom one can trust. Oh, pray, no offense. Nefertari, my love. Oh, I beg pardon. Ask Nefart. Nefertari has gone to speak to some of her children. Let me introduce you to your predecessor, the Queen Nefertiti, wife of Amenhotep IV. I mean Kuanatan. He changed his name, you know, because half of it was that of the father of the gods. She is interested in the question of plural marriage. Goodbye. I wish to have a word with my grandfather, Ramses I. He was fond of me as a little boy.
Thanks very much, AJ. Yeah, having to deal with quite a lot of unfamiliar names. Michael, perhaps you'd like to take it up.
Mm-hmm. At this moment, Smith's interest in that queer conversation died away, for of a sudden he beheld none other than the queen of his dreams, Ma-Me. Oh, there she stood, without a doubt, only 10 times more beautiful than he had ever pictured her. She was tall and somewhat fair-complexioned, with slumberous dark eyes, and on her face gleamed the mystic smile he loved. She wore a robe of simple white and a purple broidered apron. A crown of golden urei with turquoise eyes was set upon her dark hair as in her statue, and on her breast and arms were the very necklace and bracelets that he had taken from her tomb. She appeared to be somewhat moody, or rather thoughtful, for she leaned by herself against a balustrade, watching the throng without much interest. Presently a pharaoh, a black-browed, vigorous man with thick lips, drew near. "I greet your majesty," he said. She started and answered, "Oh, it is you. I make my obeisance to your majesty," and she curtsied to him, humbly enough, but with a suggestion of mockery in her movements. "Well, you do not seem to have been very anxious to find me, Ma-Me, which, considering that we meet so seldom—" "I saw that your majesty was engaged with my sister queens," she interrupted, in a rich, low voice, "and with some other ladies in the gallery there, whose faces I seem to remember, but who I think were not queens, unless, indeed, you married them after I was drawn away." "One must talk to one's relations," replied the pharaoh. "Quite so, but you see, I have no relations, at least none whom I know well. My parents, you will remember, died when I was young, leaving me Egypt's heiress, and they are still vexed at the marriage which I made on the advice of my counselors. But is it not annoying? I have lost one of my rings, that which had the god Bes on it. Some dweller on the earth must be wearing it today, and that is why I cannot get it back from him." "Who? Why him?" "Hush, the business is about to begin." "What business, my lord?" "Oh, the question of the violation of our tombs, I believe." "Indeed, that is a large subject and not a very profitable one, I should say. Tell me, who is that? and she pointed to a lady who had stepped forward, a very splendid person, magnificently arrayed. Cleopatra the Greek, he answered, the last of Egypt's sovereigns, one of the Ptolemies. You can always know her by that Roman who walks about with her. Which? Asked Mami. I see several, also other men. She was the wretch who rolled Egypt in the dirt and betrayed her. Oh, if it were not for the law of peace by which we must abide when we meet thus. You mean that she would be torn to shreds, Mami, and her very soul scattered like the limbs of Osiris? Well, if it were not for that law of peace, so perhaps would many of us, for never have I heard a single king among these hundreds speak altogether well of those who went before or followed after them. Especially of those who went before, if they happen to have hammered out their cartouches and usurped their monuments, said the queen dryly, and looked him in the eyes. At this home thrust, the pharaoh seemed to wince. Making no answer, he pointed to the royal woman who had mounted the steps at the end of the hall. Queen Cleopatra lifted her hand and stood thus for a while. Very splendid she was, and Smith, on his hands and knees behind the boarding of the boat, thanked his stars that alone among modern men it had been his lot to look upon her rich and living loveliness. There she shone, she who had changed the fortunes of the world, she who, whatever she did amiss, at least had known how to die. Silence fell upon that glittering galaxy of kings and queens, and upon all the hundreds of their offspring, their women, and their great officers who crowded the double tier of galleries around the hall. Royalties of Egypt, she began, in a sweet, clear voice which penetrated to the farthest recesses of the place. I, Cleopatra, the sixth of that name and the last monarch who ruled over the upper and the lower lands before Egypt became a home of slaves, have a word to say to your majesties, who in your mortal days, all of you, more worthily filled the throne on which once I sat. I do not speak of Egypt and its fate, or of our sins, whereof mine were not the least, that brought her to the dust. Those sins I and others expiate elsewhere, and of them from age to age we hear enough. But on this one night of the year, that at the feast of him whom we call Osiris, but whom other nations have known and know by different names, it is given to us once more to be mortal for an hour, and though we be but shadows, to renew the loves and hates of our long perished flesh. Here for an hour we strut in our forgotten pomp, the crowns that were ours still adorn our brows, and once more we seem to listen to our people's praise. Our hopes are the hopes of mortal life, our foes are the foes we feared, our gods grow real again, and our lovers whisper in our ears. Moreover, this joy is given to us, to see each other as we are, to know as the gods know, and therefore to forgive, even where we despise and hate. Now I have done, and I, the youngest of the rulers of ancient Egypt, call upon him who was the first of her kings to take my place. She bowed, and the audience bowed back to her. Then she descended the steps and was lost in the throng. Where she had been appeared an old man, simply clad, long-bearded, wise-faced, and wearing on his grey hair no crown save a plain band of gold, from the centre of which rose the snake-headed Uraeus crest. Your majesties who came after me, said the old man, I am Menes, the first of the accepted pharaohs of Egypt, although many of those who went before me were more truly kings than I. Yet as the first who joined the upper and the lower lands, and took the royal style and titles, and ruled as well as I could rule, it is given to me to talk with you for a while this night, whereon our spirits are permitted to gather from the uttermost parts of the uttermost worlds and see each other face to face. First in darkness and in secret, let us speak of the mystery of the gods and of its meanings. Next, in darkness and in secret, let us speak of the mystery of our lives, of whence they came, of where they tarry by the road, and whither they go at last. And afterwards, let us speak of other matters, face to face in light and openness, as we were wont to do when we were men. Then hence to Thebes, there to celebrate our yearly festival. Is such your will? Such is our will, they answered. It seemed to Smith that dense darkness fell upon the place, and with it a silence that was awful. For a time that he could not reckon, That might have been years or might have been moments. He sat there in the utter darkness and the utter silence. At length the light came again, first as a blue spark, then in upward pouring rays, and lastly pervading all. There stood Menes on the steps, and there in front of him was gathered the same royal throng. The mysteries are finished, said the old king. Now, if any have aught to say, let it be said openly.
Well, I'll read for a little bit now. A young man dressed in the robes and ornaments of an early dynasty came forward and stood upon the steps between the Pharaoh Menes and all those who had reigned after him. His face seemed familiar to Smith, as was the side lock that hung down behind his right ear in token of his youth. Where he had seen him? Where had he seen him? Ah, he remembered. Only a few hours ago, lying in one of the cases of the museum, together with the bones of the Pharaoh Unas. Your Majesties, he began, I am the king Metasuphis. The matter that I wish to lay before you is that of the violation of our sepulchres by those men who now live upon the earth. The mortal bodies of many who are gathered here tonight lie in this place to be stared at and mocked by the curious. I myself am one of them, jawless, broken, hideous to behold. Yonder, day by day, must my car sit watching my desecrated flesh, torn from the pyramid that, with constant labor, I raised up to be an eternal house wherein I might hide till the hour of resurrection. Others of us lie in far lands. Thus, as he can tell you, my predecessor, Menkaura, he who built the third of the great pyramids, the pyramid of Her, sleeps, or rather wakes, in a dark city called London, across the seas, a place of murk where no sun shines. Others have been burnt with fire, others are scattered in small dust. The ornaments that were ours are stole away and sold to the greedy. Our sacred writings and our symbols are their jest. Soon there will be not one holy grave in Egypt that remains undefiled. That is so, said a voice from the company. But 4 months gone, the deep pit was opened that I had dug in the shadow of the pyramid of Sephrem, who begat me in the world. There in my chamber I slept alone, 2 handfuls of white bones. Since when I died, they did not preserve the body with wrappings and with spices. Now I see those bones of mine, beside which my double had watched for these 5,000 years, hid in the blackness of a great ship and tossing on a sea that is strewn with ice. It is so, echoed 100 other voices. Then went on the young king, turning to Menes, I ask of your majesty whether there is no means whereby we may be avenged on those who do us this foul wrong. Let him who has wisdom speak, said the old pharaoh. A man of middle age, short in stature and of a thoughtful brow, who held in his hand a wand and wore the feathers and insignia of the heir to the throne of Egypt and of a high priest of Amun, moved to the steps. Smith knew him at once from the statues. He was Kaimuas, son of Ramesses the Great, the mightiest magician that ever was in Egypt, who of his own will withdrew himself from earth before the time came that he should sit upon the throne. I have wisdom, your majesties, and I will answer, he said. The time draws on when, in the land of death, which is life, the land that we call Amenti, it will be given to us to lay our wrongs as to this matter before those who judge, knowing that they will be avenged. On this night of the year also, when we resume the shapes we were, we have certain powers of vengeance, or rather of executing justice. But our time is short, and there is much to say and do before the sun god Ra arises and we depart each to his place. Therefore, it seems best that we should leave these wicked ones in their wickedness till we meet them face to face beyond the world. Smith, who had been following the words of Caemuas with the closest attention and considerable anxiety, breathed again, thanking heaven and the engagements of these departed monarchs, that the engagements of these departed monarchs were so numerous and pressing. Still, as a matter of precaution, he drew the cigar box which contained Marmie's hand from his pocket and pushed it as far from him as he could. It was a most unlucky act. Perhaps the cigar box grated on the floor, or perhaps the fact of his touching the relic put him into psychic communication with all these spirits. At any rate, he became aware that the eyes of that dreadful magician were fixed upon him, and that the bone had a better chance of escaping the search of a Rontgen ray than he of riding himself from their baleful glare. As it happens, however, went on Caemuas in a cold voice, I now perceive that there is hidden in this place and spying on us one of the worst of these vile thieves. I say to your majesties that I see him crouched beneath yonder funeral barge, and that he has with him at this moment the hand of one of your majesties, stolen by him from her tomb at Thebes. Now every queen in the company became visibly agitated. Smith, who was watching Marmee, saw her hold up her hands and look at them, while all the pharaohs pointed with their fingers and exclaimed together in a voice that rolled round the hall like thunder, let him be brought forth to judgment. Caemuas raised his wand and holding it towards the boat where Smith was hidden, said, draw near, vile one, bringing with thee that thou hast stolen. Michael, perhaps you would take up the story again.
Smith tried hard to remain where he was. He sat himself down and set his heels against the floor. As the reader knows, he was always shy and retiring of disposition, and never had these weaknesses oppressed him more than they did just then. When a child, his favorite nightmare had been that the foreman of a jury was in the act of proclaiming him guilty of some dreadful but unstated crime. Now he understood what that nightmare foreshadowed. He was about to be convicted in a court of which all the kings and queens of Egypt were the jury. Menes was the chief justice, and the magician Caemuas played the role of attorney general. In vain did he sit down and hold fast. Some power took possession of him and forced him first to stretch out his arm and pick up the cigar box containing the hand of Marmee, and next drew him from the friendly shelter of the deal boards that were about to float. Now he was on his feet and walking down the flight of steps opposite to those of which many stood far away. Now he was among all that throng of ghosts which parted to let him pass, looking at him as he went with cold and wondering eyes. They were very majestic ghosts. The ages that had gone by since they laid down their scepters had taken nothing from the royal dignity. Moreover, save one, none of them seemed to have any pity for his plight. She was a little princess who stood by her mother, that same little princess whose mummy he had seen pitied in the director's room with a lotus flower thrust beneath her bandaging. As he passed, Smith heard her say, this vile one is frightened. Be brave, vile one. Smith understood, and pride came to his aid. He, a gentleman of the modern world, would not show the white feather before a crowd of ancient Egyptian ghosts. Turning to the child, he smiled at her, then drew himself to his full height and walked on quietly. Here it may be stated that Smith was a tall man, still comparatively young and very good looking, straight and spare in frame, with dark, pleasant eyes and a little black beard. At least he is a well-favored thief, said one of the queens to another. Yes, answered she who had been addressed. I wonder that a man with such a noble air should find pleasure in disturbing graves and stealing the offerings of the dead. Words that gave Smith much cause for thought. He had never considered the matter in this light. Now he came to a place where Margaret stood. the black-browed Pharaoh who had been her husband at her side. On his left hand, which held the cigar box with the ring, that box he felt constrained to carry, pressed against him just over his heart. As he went by, he turned his head, and his eyes met those of Montaigne. She started violently. Then she saw the ring of his hand and again started still more violently. "What ails your majesty?" asked the Pharaoh. "Oh, naught," she answered. "Yet does this earth dweller remind you of anyone?" "Yes, he does," answered the Pharaoh. "He reminds me very much of that accursed sculptor about whom we had words." "Do you mean a certain Horu, the court artist, he who worked the image that was buried with me, and whom you sent to carve your statues in the desert of Cush till he died of fever? Or was it poison?" "Aye, Horu and no other. They said take and keep him," growled the Pharaoh. Then Smith passed on and heard no more. Now he stood before the venerable Menes. Some instinct caused him to bow to this Pharaoh, who bowed back to him. Then he turned and bowed to the royal company, and they also bowed back to him, boldly, but very gravely and courteously. "Dweller on the world where once we had our place, and therefore brother of us, the dead," began this divine priest and magician, and he pointed to Anubis, "declares that you are one of those who foully violate our sepulchres and desecrate our ashes. He declares, moreover, that at this very moment you have with you a portion of the mortal flesh of a certain majesty whose spirit is present here. Say now, are these things true?" To his astonishment, Smith found that he had not the slightest difficulty in answering in the same speaking tongue. "O king, they are true and not true. Hear me, rulers of Egypt. It is true that I have searched their graves because my heart has been drawn towards you, and I would learn all that I could concerning you. For it comes to me now that once I was one of you, no king indeed, but yet perchance of the blood of kings. Also, for I would hide nothing, even if I could. I searched for one tomb above all others." "Why, O man?" asked the judge. "Because a face drew me, a lovely face that was cut in stone." Now all that great audience turned their eyes towards him and listened as though his words moved them. "Did you find that holy tomb?" asked Menes. "If so, what did you find therein?" "Aye, Pharaoh, and in it I found these." And he took from the box the withered hand from his pocket, the broken bronze, and from his finger the ring. "Also I found other things which I delivered to the keeper of this palace, ordered as a jury that I seemed to be tonight upon one who is present here among you." "Is the face of this figure the face you sought?" asked the judge. "It is the lovely face," he answered. Menes took the effigy in his hand and read the cartouche that was engraved beneath his breast. "If there be here among us," he said presently, "one who, long after my day, ruled as queen in Egypt, one who is named Mame, let her draw here." Now from where she stood glided Mame and took her place opposite to Smith. "Say, O king," asked Menes, do you know aught of this matter?" "I know that hand. It was my own hand," he answered. "I know that ring. It was my ring. I know that image in bronze. It was my image. Look on me and judge for yourself whether this be so. A certain sculptor fashioned it, the son of a king's son who was named Horu, the first of sculptors and the head artist of my court. There, clad in strange garments, he stands before you, Horu, or the double of Horu. He who cut the image that I ruled in Egypt is he who found the image in the man who stands before you, or mayhap his double cast in the same mold." The Pharaoh Menes turned to the magician Anubis and said, "Are these things so, O seer?" "They are," answered Anubis. "This dweller on the earth is he who long ago spoke for Horu. But what shall that avail? He, once more a living man, is a violator of the hallowed dead. I say, therefore, that judgment should be executed on flesh. So when the light comes here tomorrow, he himself will again be gathered to the dead." Then he bent his head upon his breast and pondered. Smith said nothing. To him, the whole play was so curious that he had no wish to interfere with its development. If these ghosts wish to make him of their number, let them do so. He had no ties of earth, and now when he knew full surely that there was a life beyond this of earth, he was quite prepared to explore its mysteries. So he folded his arms on his breast and awaited the sentence. But Monet did not wait. She raised her hand so swiftly that the bracelets jingled on her wrist and spoke out with boldness. Royal Camus, prince and magician, she said, hearken to one who, like you, was Egypt's heir centuries before you were born. One also who ruled over the two lands, and not so ill, which prince never was your lot. Answer me. Is all wisdom centered in your breast? Answer me. Do you alone know the mysteries of life and death? Answer me. Did your God Amen teach you that vengeance went before mercy? Answer me. Did he teach you that men should be judged unhurried, that they should be unhurried, that they should be hurried by violence, to Osiris ere their time, and thereby separated from the dead ones whom they loved and forced to return to live again upon this evil earth? Listen, when the last moon was near, her full, my spirit sat in my tomb in the burying place of Queen. My spirit told this man, enter my tomb, and what he did there. With bowed head, he looked upon my bones, that a thief of the priesthood had robbed and burnt within 20 years of their burial, in which he himself had taken part. And what did this man with those bones? He who was once Horus. I tell you, he had hid them away there in the tomb, where he thought they could not be found again. Who then was the thief and the violator? He who robbed and burnt my bones, or he who buried them with reverence? Again, found the jewels that the priest of your brotherhood had dropped in his flight, when the smoke of the burning flesh and spices overpowered them, and with them the hand which that wicked one had broken off from my body of my majesty. What did this man then? He took the jewels. Would you have had him leave them to be stolen peasants? And the hand? I tell you that he kissed that poor dead hand which once had been part of the body of my majesty, and that now he treasures it as a holy relic. My spirit saw him do these things, and made report thereof to me. I ask you, therefore, Prince, I ask you all, royalties of Egypt, whether for such deeds this man should die.
Thanks, Michael. Janine, perhaps you'd take it up.
Yeah. Now Camas, the advocate of vengeance, shrugged his shoulders and smiled meaningly, but the congregation of kings and queens thundered the answer, and it was no. Monet looked to Menes to give judgment. Before he could speak, the dark-browed Pharaoh, who had named her wife, strode forward and addressed them. Her Majesty, heiress of Egypt, royal wife, lady of the two lands, has spoken, he cried. Now let me speak, who was the husband of Her Majesty. Whether this man was once Horu the sculptor, I know not. If so, he was also an evil doer who, by my decree, died in banishment in the land of Cush. Whatever be the truth as to that matter, he admits that he violated the tomb of Her Majesty and stole what the old thieves had left. Her Majesty says also, and he does not deny it, that he dared to kiss her hand, and for a man to kiss the hand of a wedded queen of Egypt, the punishment is death. I claim that this man should die to the world before his time, that in a day to come again he may live and suffer in the world. Judge, O Menes. Menes lifted his head and spoke, saying, repeat to me the law, O Pharaoh, under which a living man must die for kissing of a dead hand. In my day, and in that of those who went before me, there was no such law in Egypt. If a living man who was not her husband or of her kin kissed the living hand of a wedded queen of Egypt, save in ceremony, then perchance he might be called upon to die. Perchance for such a reason a certain Horu once was called upon to die. But in the grave there is no marriage, and therefore, even if he had found her alive within the tomb and kissed her hand or even his lips, why should he die for a crime of love? Hear me all. This is my judgment in the matter. Let the soul of that priest who first violated the tomb of the royal Mame be hunted down and given to the jaws of the destroyer, that he may know the last depth of death. If so, the gods declare. But let this man go from among us unharmed, since what he did in reverent ignorance, and because Hathor, goddess of love, guided him from of old. Love rules this world wherein we meet tonight, with all the worlds whence we have gathered, or whither we still must go. Who can defy its power? Who can refuse its rights? Now hence to Thebes. There was a rushing sound of 1,000 wings, and all were gone. No, not all. Since Smith stood yet before the draped colossi and the empty steps, and beside him, glorious, unearthly, gleamed the vision of Mame. I too must away, she whispered, yet ere I go a word with you, who once were a sculptor of Egypt. You loved me then, and that love cost you your life. You who once dared to kiss this hand of mine, that again you kissed in yonder tomb. For I was Pharaoh's wife in name only. Understand me well, in name only. Since the title of royal mother, which they gave me, is but a graven lie. Horu, I was never a wife, and when you died, swiftly I followed you to the grave. Oh, you forget, but I remember. I remember many things. You think that the priestly thief broke this finger of me, which you found in the sand outside my tomb. Not so. I broke it, because daring greatly, you had written thereon, beloved, not of Horus the god, as you should have done, but of Horu the man. So when I came to be buried, Pharaoh, knowing all, took the image from my wrappings and hurled it away. I remember too the casting of that image, and how you threw a gold chain I had given you into the crucible with the bronze, saying that gold alone was fit to fashion me. And this signet that I bear, it was you who cut it. Take it, Horu, and in this place give me back that which is on your hand, the best ring that I also wore. Take it and wear it ever till you die again, and let it go to the grave with you as once it went to the grave with me. Now hearken, when Ra, the great sun, rises again and you awake, you will think that you have dreamed a dream. You will think that in this dream you saw and spoke with the lady of Egypt, who died more than 3,000 years ago, but whose beauty, carved in stone and bronze, has charmed your heart today. So let it be. Yet know, O man, who once was named Horu, that such dreams are ofttimes a shadow of the truth. Know that this glory which shines before you is mine indeed, in the land that is both far and near, the land wherein I dwell eternally, and that what is mine has been, is, and shall be yours forever. Gods may change their kingdoms and their names. Men may live and die, and live again once more to die. Empires may fall, and those who ruled them be turned to forgotten dust. Yet true love endures, immortal as the souls in which it was conceived. And from it, for you and me, the night of woe and separation done, at the daybreak which draws on, there shall be born the splendor and the peace of union. Till that hour, foredoomed, seek me no more, though I ever near you as I ever have been. Till that most blessed hour, Horu, farewell.
Oh, thanks. AJ, perhaps you'd take it up, and I think you might be able to read to the end, which isn't that far away.
I only have 10 minutes before I have to go. So
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I think, yeah.
I think it'll be 10 minutes. I don't think it'll be more. It's just one
okay.
I'll try it then.
Thank you.
She bent towards him, her sweet lips touched his brow. The perfume from her breath and her hair beat upon him. The light of her wondrous eyes searched out his very soul, reading the answer that was written there. He stretched out his arms to clasp her, and lo, she was gone. It was a very cold and very stiff Smith who awoke on the following morning, to find himself exactly where he had lain down, namely on a cement floor beneath the keel of a funeral boat in the central hall of the Cairo Museum. He crept from his shelter shivering and looked down this hole to find it quite as empty as it had been on the previous evening. Not a sign or a token was there of Pharaoh Menes and all those kings and queens of whom he had dreamed so vividly. Reflecting on the strange fantasies and weariness and excited nerves can summon to the mind in sleep, Smith made his way to the great doors and waited in the shadow, praying earnestly that although it was the Mohammedan Sabbath, someone might visit the museum that was all well, to see that all. As a matter of fact, someone did, and before there had been a minute, a watchman going about his business. He unlocked the place carelessly, looking over his shoulder at a kite fighting with two nesting crows. In an instant, Smith, who was not minded to stop and answer questions, had slipped past him and was gliding towards the portico, from monument to monument, like a snake between boulders, still keeping in the shadow as he headed for the gates. The attendant caught sight of him and uttered a yell of fear. Then, since it was not good to look upon an Afrit, appearing from whence no mortal man could be, he turned his head away. When he looked again, Smith was through those gates and had mingled with the crowd in the street beyond. The sunshine was very pleasant to one who was conscious of having contracted a chill of the worst Egyptian order from long contact with a damp stone floor. Smith walked on through it towards his hotel. It was Shepherd's and more than a mile away, making up a story as he went to tell the hall porter of how he had got to dine at Manna House by the pyramids, missed the last tram, and stopped the night there. Whilst he was thus engaged, his left hand struck somewhat sharply against the corner of the cigar box in his pocket, that which contained the relic of Queen Mame. The pain caused him to glance at his fingers to see if they were injured, and to perceive on one of them the ring he wore. Surely it was not the same that the Director General had given him. That ring was engraved with the image of the god Bes. On this was cut the cartouche of Her Majesty Mame, and he had dreamed though he had dreamed. To this day, Smith is wondering whether, in the hurry of the moment, he had made a mistake as to which of those rings the Director General had given him as part of his share of the spoil of the royal tomb he discovered in the Valley of Queens. Afterward, Smith wrote to ask, but the Director General could only remember that he had given him one of the two rings and assured him that inscribed Bes Ankh Bes was with Mame's other jewels in the gold room of the museum. Also, Smith is wondering whether any other bronze figure of an old Egyptian royalty shows so high a percentage of gold as, on analysis, the broken image of Mame was proved to do. For had she not seemed to tell him a tale of the melting of a gold chain when the effigy was cast? Was it all only a dream, or was it something more? By day and by night, he asks of nothingness. But be she near or far, no answer comes from Queen Mame, whose proud titles were, hold on, I need to shut the copy. Her Majesty the Good God, the justified dweller in Osiris, daughter of Amen, royal heiress, royal sister, royal wife, royal mother, lady of the two lands. Wearer of the double crown, of the white crown, of the red crown, sweet flower of love, beautiful, eternal. So, like the rest of us, Smith was waiting to learn the truth concerning many things, and more particularly as to which of those two circles of ancient gold the Director General had given him yonder Cairo. It seems but a little matter, yet it is more than all the world's thing. To the astonishment of his colleagues in antiquarian research, Smith has never returned to Egypt. He explains to them that his health is quite restored and he no longer needs his annual change to a more temperate clime. Now, which of the two royal rings did the Director General return to Smith of the mummified hand of Her late Majesty Mame?
Thank you very, very much. Oh, look, that's ended ended in quite a satisfactory way. What do we think? It's a shame that Hewitt isn't here, because he thought it was a very unsatisfactory conclusion.
Yeah, he was quite strong about that, so it's a
He
pity
was.
that he wasn't. Yeah, but maybe because he felt that so strongly, he didn't wish to read any more of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did he say why he disapproved of the story?
I don't think I'd say disapproved. I think he said that he found that the end, I think unsatisfactory was the word he used. And he also intimated that we would agree with him. So I don't personally. So
no, I don't. I mean, it's I know it's a rather conventional thing to invoke a dream to express certain ideas, but you know, it's a conventional one because it does serve its purpose quite well, I think. So I found that enjoyable. What do we think?
How else could it have ended? Okay, what other kind of an ending would one have wanted?
Yeah,
indeed. I mean, once you've gone down the road of the supernatural, how are you going to end it? Either you leave it with an open question a little bit. Was it a dream or wasn't it? Almost like Midsummer Night's Dream, you know. And that seems to me to be entirely acceptable. You're absolutely right. I mean, what else? To have revealed that it wasn't a dream and it was all the trick, that might have been unsatisfactory.
I mean, it seems to be saying that it was this relationship with what one could say with a higher truth. That was the thing that he was really fascinated by in ancient Egypt, and he had achieved that, and therefore that was enough. So in that sense,
it's a love story.
Yeah, it was
absolutely.
Yeah,
It has some similarities to the story of She.
Well, absolutely, yes, yeah.
Yeah, these ancient lovers that have been reincarnated and will be reincarnated again. I found it interesting for that reason.
I think what I did come through was a sincerity there, that it wasn't just an artificial concoction. It was something that did come from actual beliefs of the author.
But I can see where Hugh might have been dissatisfied. I know I was too, because it reminded me of the story of the Lady and the Tiger. And people say, well, you have to decide that for yourself. Personally, I think that's a cheap trick of a writer. I buy it all the way until the very last sentence.
Ginny, can you answer Michael's question with a thought as to how it could have been ended in a better? I mean, not an easy one. How one could have ended it in a more satisfactory way.
Like I say, I think we could have just chopped off the last sentence and just let it go.
Okay, yeah.
In other words, you don't need a question about, was it really a dream? Well, what difference does it make? We, like as you said, and I agree with you. This is a love story, and it is probably no offense, a male wish fulfillment story. He was in love with her, and it just so happened that he was the man she really loved, and I can see where, especially at that time, there's a kind of a romantic kind of a thing, because why? The obsession with death and what happens, and we're going to meet loved ones in the next world, and she pledges her love to him. So it's almost like, well, even if it didn't really happen, I sure wish it had. And like I say, the very, very end, less is more. And if he would have left off the question, I think it would have been better.
Okay, no,
sorry.
Let me just say I agree with Janine about these ambiguous endings. I detested the end of the Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. It so infuriated me. But and I agree that final part could have been eliminated. But basically, she, as a love story, she is what saves him, whether it's within a dream or whether it's supernatural. she saves him from his own immediate death. So I thought it was a beautiful story. I really
I
enjoyed
do too. Yeah.
I
do.
think I should read it again. I think I should read it again. Yeah.
I would just to a small element that I do know, also having read his biography, is that he had enormous religious questioning throughout his life and tended very much to believe in reincarnation, which came into conflict with his Christian beliefs.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just necessarily a trick. I think there was at the end, perhaps it wasn't so appropriate for the story, some of his real kind of religious turbulation and self-doubt and questioning came in at the end. There's a certain genuine element there, which doesn't naturally mean that you're wrong in saying that it is not so effective at the end, but it might suggest a less perhaps cynical motive. It's just simply that he really himself was in a state of doubt. That was the impression I have from him.
If one believes in reincarnation, everything changes. I think in lots of cases, really, it does affect the whole notion of the self. It changes, and that is something, quite radical. You know, the self in the Christian context is a very limited thing. It's an individualized thing, and the kind of hyper individualized culture that we're experiencing some of the problems of now is maybe the playings out of this kind of Christian theology of individual self. But anyway, that's a bigger issue. AJ, what was sorry, yeah.
I have to go. I thank you for this.
Thank you. Good, great to see you. I'm pleased to see you.
And I can, Michael, really, if you haven't read it, read She. I do recommend it.
Yeah, good to see you, AJ. I think you've got to go as well. But okay, lovely to see you, Michael. Thank you. Did you enjoy it, AJ? Was it a thumbs up?
You know, I liked it. And I saw the movie She, but I just downloaded the book, and you've inspired me to read the book.
Oh well, that's
Hey,
good. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Then,
That's
folks.
good.
One thing I really
thanks
found
so much.
interesting was that the quote that really got to me, that really stuck, was vengeance before mercy. And I thought, is justice. And I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty profound when you think about it. Because on Earth, you have courts and even death penalty and punishment and all this. And people say, well, that's vengeance. That's not really justice. But when you put it in the context of this story, where she says, vengeance precedes mercy. And it's like, vengeance is of the human realm. Mercy, God can afford to be generous. He can afford to be merciful. We can't. We have to keep law and order here. Otherwise, we'll all kill each other. And I thought, that's pretty insightful, I think, to have that within the story of a love story. That really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Well, there was, I mean, he was somebody who hoped vainly for the recreation of the British Empire, but in the context of very much the British Empire dispensing justice in the way that you describe it, whereas mercy is more of a divine thing. So I think that was also very much part of his idea of the world, which was also then intermixed with this very unusual, especially for its time, this empathy towards different cultures and religions. Kazim was a fascinating man as a colonial figure who was very much a colonialist. I mean, not a colonialist, I'm born into this time and I don't question it, but an active, conscious colonialist who, after the First World War, saw the Ottawa Conference, I mean, very much a political figure. And yet at the same time, somebody who had a tremendous empathy for other cultures, a very interesting person.
I think that was much more common than what we're inclined to think.
That came up with the first thing we had on Rider Haggard, didn't it? Which I pointed out that it wasn't necessarily as rare as we thought, that there was questioning of certain kinds of exploitation and so on. Going back to the punishment of the East India Company when the British Empire took over was because the East India Company had behaved so barbarically in Egypt, and the great speeches of Burke and so on was against that kind of exploitation. And we tend to be given a view now that it was just a sort of machine of brutalism and exploitation, and everybody agreed with it. It was not true.
Someone like Dr. Johnson, that we think of as a very conservative figure, which he is. He nonetheless had profound sympathy for people in all positions, culturally speaking, and that was one of the things that I gained a lot from giving the presentation about him. He was a very complex man who had far more sympathy for the East than one would imagine such a kind of a stout of Englishman would have done. He's known for his kind of John Bull ripostes, which were probably done more in banter than anything else, I think. But anyway, I mean, he was a good writer, Rider Haggard. I mean, he uses English very skillfully. I mean, there
are some writers who perhaps one just tends to categorize them and dismiss them. Maybe perhaps Rider Haggard is one of them, and sometimes it's worth going back to them and reading them and putting aside what one has heard about them and just reading them as it were for the first time, and finding that they're much better writers maybe than one thought. I would say at another level, although perhaps people laugh at me, is even Dennis Wheatley.
I've not read it.
You've not read anything about it. No. If you go back to Dennis Wheatley, it's like, hey, that man could write.
Oh, really? Yes.
Well,
yes,
I think so. I mean, I know he's just a potboiler hack. That's how he's regarded these days. Out of date, dated. Potboiler, trash.
Yeah, I mean, there's something just funny about the 19th, isn't there?
Well,
yes,
but there it is. It's just one of those.
Oh right, well, maybe we should read some Dennis Wheatley, particularly in the winter evenings or whatever.
I've seen literally some of those really quite spooky things. I mean, there are scenes in Dennis Wheatley, the one where the devil rides out and he says, "Here, catch this." And the girl unexpected, and she catches the thing, and then she screams, and of course it's a crucifix, and he says, "My poor girl, you are possessed by the devil." I think that was most dramatic writing on them. But that's just the way I look. Sometimes I think we're too influenced we approach writers, and we've got this baggage of what we're expected to take from them. They are literature or they're not literature. But
so I agree.
About that. I would throw in, but absolutely recommend, if anybody's interested in Tintin, that there are two, if you like Tintin. The Cigars of the Pharaohs has that Egyptology and that mysticism, and I almost wonder if Hergé was, you might say today, been smoking something, because that Cigar of the Pharaohs, it's no longer realistic. Tintin is in a coffin on the sea, and it's most bizarre. I can recommend it. And more seriously, with this theme, this idea of culture and cultural robbery and so on, is of course the Seven Crystal Bulls and Prisoners of the Sun. And they're all rather the themes in a funny way that are touched upon in this short story. So I'm a great Tintin fan, but if you have
I suppose that would, I wonder whether that would be easy to gain access to such that we could read it together in a format. I don't know whether that's maybe.
I don't know how to do that with Tintin. I mean, I suppose you could kind of show images. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. We could
something
see,
perhaps to work on.
That would be very entertaining, wouldn't it? Easy to with pictures as well. So that would be.
Are people familiar with Tintin? I'm always interested to know what other people are familiar with. I mean,
Janine, have you?
I've heard I've heard the words Tintin, but I didn't know in what context.
Oh, really?
That is used. I'm not that familiar with that. Is it it's an English staple, obviously. I mean,
Michael, you.
Well, I mean, Tintin was the creation by somebody called Serge Rémy, who used the pen name Hergé for the Belgian newspaper called Le Petit 20e in the 1920s. And
Ah,
Tintin
okay.
was this journalist who had a fox terrier. And Tintin and this fox terrier, in English known as Snowy and French known as Milou, they have all kinds of adventures. The first one was Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, which was immediately banned by the new Soviet government as being
Was this
anti-communist.
satirical stuff that they wrote?
Oh, yeah, it was the first one, very crudely drawn, but Tintin in the Land of the Soviets was absolutely still today considered paranoically anti-Soviet, but I think probably a very fair representation. There's the classic scene is Soviet democracy, and Tintin's sort of behind a
That's
wall.
an oxymoron, but go
And
ahead.
there are two comrades with a huge gun on a table, and said, now, all those in favor of Comrade Zainov's proposal, raise your hands. And this person points a gun and they all go out like that. He says, unanimously agreed. And the comment in the back is, Tintin discovers Soviet democracy. And so, yeah, but that was very crudely drawn and was banned for a long time, and also only about 20 years ago even reprinted in the West. But there are many, I mean, he didn't spare anyone, and the Tintin in America is extremely anti-American, as a matter of fact. And the British don't come off too well, because Alan is this sea captain who tends to be, is supposed to be a good salt of the earth sort of sea captain, hale-hearty. He's obviously English, and he's a complete
Captain Haggard.
scoundrel.
Captain Haggard.
No, Captain Haggard's
nice.
No.
I'm getting.
Alan.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. I'm getting. Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
you mustn't get confused. Alan is the person who was the first mate, who he exploited Captain Haddock's addition to whiskey to take control of the boat and begin opium smuggling, and he's the most atrocious character. And anyway,
it's I mean, it is a literary genre. It's a literary kind of thing.
It's a world for itself. But just going back to the Egypt thing, the cigars of the Pharaohs is about drug smuggling. So it's not totally extreme to talk about, because the drugs are in cigars, and in Tintin's vision, he sees people smoking cigars, and in the cigars of the Pharaohs. Yeah, Tintin does have that experience in Egypt and everything.
Sounds almost kind of like a Monty Python-y kind of approach to cultures and stereotypes of cultures. Am I far off?
Sure about that. I'm not too sure. It's more about his own culture than about the Egyptian culture. I mean, it's more about the people who. It's not. I think you'd have to read it. I wouldn't call it that. It's not satirical in that way. It's more like a fantastic, the old sense of the word, fantastic dream.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just to return to the author whose work we were reading tonight. A friend told me that his work was banned apparently in the Soviet Union. Rider Haggard, which seems extraordinary. She said it was considered promoting mysticism and other things like that.
Well, it is. I mean, there's obviously a strong belief there of the possibility of reincarnation, a respect for old religions. Couldn't possibly have fitted in with the.
That would offend any atheist. I mean,
yeah, I mean, even their own writing. I mean, even Dostoevsky was always. I think the decision with Dostoevsky was that you could read him from the library, but he would never be published again. So I heard that Dostoevsky in the Soviet Union, there was a long waiting list to get him from the library, and all the kind of pages were falling out. I don't know if that's true, but it sounds plausible.
Really, yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Now I think I need to be going, but there's no reason why I can't leave the meeting.
No, I think we've had a fair shot. Well, listen, Jane, if you're interested in that, if you both are interested in that book in German, I can email it to you.
Yeah, I may be able to get a translation of that somewhere, hopefully.
Can you?
Well, not yet, I shouldn't think, because it's been published very recently. I think it came out a month ago or something.
Oh, okay. I don't know. They're doing pretty good on translating stuff, available.
People
on-
do, yeah. There is a tendency to translate
Yeah.
things very, very fast. You know.
I know, I'm sure with the addition of artificial translation machines, and that's going to get better
Mhm.
more and more, and with a bit of cursory human checking. I
How about
think,
that
yeah,
AI thing? they got
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, that's right.
Well, so then the next meeting, then what's on the table for that?
Right. Well, good question.
I enjoy these meetings where we just read through.
Yeah, they seem to work very well. I
For
agree.
me,
with you.
I've been looking forward to reading this much more than I have in the past been looking forward to hearing presentations, because it's actually eating food rather than talking about menus.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah,
That's a nice way of putting it. And perhaps one should say that these days people hear presentations much more than they ever read a book. So perhaps
Yeah.
one stress that. So I think I tend to agree with you.
I mean, I could easily put up with and indeed relish an hour like this, an hour and a half every week. I could certainly do that. But whether there'd be interest, I don't know. Well, maybe we should look at Dennis Wheatley then.
Okay, but although I don't know if he wrote many short stories, did he? Yeah.
Well, we could just
have scenes from. It's an idea.
Just sort of start reading a book and then get a certain distance into it, and then people can finish it on their own. I mean,
I have to admit that I threw out all my Dennis Wheatley books at a time when I thought, in a snobbish way, I shouldn't have books by a
well, that
writer,
seems a good reason for us to revisit Mr. Wheatley.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I've still got The Devil Rides Out though, because that really was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's see whether that's available.
Okay. Well, we can have a look into that. It's probably online. These things are available, and I wouldn't go. But I have to say that with a certain reserve. I don't want you to feel or to discover, in your opinion, that he's such a second-rate writer. But I don't think so. I don't. It'd be interesting.
I don't think it's good for us to make judgments in advance too much. I think which is why we should be open to
and of course
looking at anything.
Open to that Egyptian side. Of course, one of his books is called The Car of Guildford Hillary?
Okay, that's good. All right then. Excellent. Great to see you, Janine. Always a pleasure. And likewise,
Stan,
Michael.
We'll think about a date or something for Dennis Wheatley.
I think this time is good in the evenings somehow. I think it works better.
Doesn't it?
It works better.
I tend to agree with you.
Thanks very much for the check, which will help with the Zoom account as well, which costs because of the recording capacity.
Absolutely. I'm just so shocked by the price of British postage.
Well, I don't have an address where I can make a donation. Do you guys have like a?
I'm
not quite sure.
Do you have PayPal?
Yes.
Oh well, something for I think for the Zoom account. I don't know. I mean, you can just send me something if you want. Just don't.
Well, but I don't have an email address for the PayPal account.
Oh, you can. I mean, my email address you can use.
Oh, okay.
It'll be attached. Yeah, attached to that, and that will contribute to the. I can transfer. Yeah. There was. I'm not sure whether anyone's paying into the London Blocked account, but that was used for various things. So we'll see. Yeah, no, that would be kind appreciated.
Absolutely.
That's very good.
Let me know what our next meeting is and what the.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
absolutely. Maybe we'll see each other at Edward's next event, which I think.
Yes, the 30th.
Yes, I think will be good. Will you be there, Michael?
I'm not sure. When is that?
I mean, it's always on a Wednesday about 6 o'clock.
I might do. Although that is a bit what you were saying, wasn't it? Somebody giving a talk, but yeah.
But it's normally quite short, and there's a lot of space for.
I've written down here a conservative case for limits on private property, and I think that'll probably be a really, really interesting.
Oh, okay.
Topic.
He
And
he
that's on the third then, yeah.
he does get very good speakers, Edward.
Well, he
I mean,
does.
he's an extraordinary young man. The number of connections he's got is quite quite beyond one's imagining, and he's a very nice person. You know, he's a really nice guy. All right then, good. Well, yeah, good to see you, and look forward to our next meeting whenever
Okay.
Whenever it is.
Okay.
Keep in touch.
Here.
Yeah.
Yeah, bye for now. Bye bye. Bye bye.